Although I don't really recommend it, technically it's possible that you could live your personal life without ever having a budget. Even though many people don't formally create household budgets, at some level there has to be an idea in your head about how you're going to spend your money, or perhaps more accurately, what you will need to spend your money on, which will then tell you if and how much money you have to spend on those other leftover things. If you don't, I can pretty much assure you that at some time it's all going to come crashing down on you in a very bad way. That's just a little bit of personal advice. In business, budgets are not usually considered optional. They are required in order to plan cash flow and have the ability to meet financial obligations. In larger organizations, budgets are usually done by smaller parts of the organization so that the organization as a whole knows how it needs to function and function in an effective way, not the least of which is managing income, expenses, and cash flow. Budgets usually contain expense categories. If you're interested in being sure that you have enough money to pay for those expenses, then they'll contain income as well, but some do just address expenses. They then have individual items within those categories that need to be considered. Budgets are usually broken down into monthly expenses, but for some businesses, this may be done for quarterly or annual expenses as well. Budgets usually have one or more totals to help summarize the data for an overall picture of the cash requirements. Now, budgets can be formatted and arranged in a variety of ways in Excel. What often occurs is that they are spread over multiple worksheets, either being separated by location or maybe month or perhaps income and expense categories themselves. This creates the need to be able to not only work easily with multiple worksheets, but also to be able to summarize that information in order to simplify it. Flexibility for everyone in an organization who may need to use them is important. In the Budgets Workbook file, we have 4 individual worksheets, one for each office location of our company. If we look at the bottom of the screen, we can see Boise, Boston, Denver, and Seattle. Each of these worksheets includes standard expense items as corporate wants to see them. That's for consistency's sake. There's also a budget category and values for each month of the given year. Each budget for each location is formatted exactly the same way. The very first worksheet is actually a summary worksheet, and it's not quite finished yet. It requires a lot of calculations that will be done after we work with the individual locations. We need to put some finishing touches on the individual worksheets as well as create the summary calculations. We also want to create some visual representations to make it easier to understand at a glance, as well as to be able to share the overall budget picture with our management team. As we start to review our worksheets, we notice that Boise looks okay, but when we get to Boston, we notice that it looks like there's some empty values. In fact, there are 2 different things that catch our eye. One is that there are no values for the sewer expense, and also that there is nothing for the internet expense. We actually understand why this is. Not all of our offices have all of the expenses. Remember that corporate has dictated what they need to put into their budget for consistency's sake. But in this case, for example, Boston does not have a separate sewer expense. It's included with their rent or their lease payment. What we know that we want to do, though, is make sure that no one else gets confused by this. That if a value is actually 0, like it is for sewer, that it actually shows up NA for not applicable, as opposed to the values like internet, which are just empty. It's often important to differentiate between the two. So we're going to start by grouping the worksheets together. To do that, we're going to move back to our very first location, which is the Boise worksheet. Hold the Shift key on the keyboard and click on the last worksheet, which is Seattle. They all appear lit up and are bolded. Now anything that we do on one worksheet applies to all of the others. Now it's simply a matter of formatting our cells. We'll start by selecting all of the values. That means we're going to start with cell C5 and bring it all the way down to the very bottom, which includes cell N13. Now we can bring up the Format Cells dialog in a variety of ways. I'm simply going to right-click. We'll choose Format Cells, and we'll go to the Custom category if it's not already selected. Custom categories actually have 4 different possible areas: positive numbers, negative numbers, 0 values, and text. Each of these sections is separated by a semicolon. We're interested in formatting the 0 values. Now, if we wanted to, we could simplify this by also taking out text values. But if we wanted to leave that in, we simply need to move before the last semicolon and delete what's currently here back to the next semicolon. Then we need to enter the value that we want, which happens to be a text entry. When we're working with custom formats, anything we want to appear as static or hard-coded text needs to go into double quotation marks. We'll type in NA for not applicable, close out that double quote, and then come down to the bottom of the window and simply click or tap OK. Now remember, Boise, which is the currently active sheet, doesn't have any of these zero values. And we don't want to take a look at Boston quite yet until we do one or two more things based on our grouping. The next thing that we know that's going to apply to all of our worksheets is the fact that our company has entered into a national contract for internet services. While each individual location will be paying its own bill, the cost is going to be the same across the board, and that's $248. So by simply clicking in cell C10, which is the January cost for internet on the Boise sheet, and entering our value of $248, we can then take that value, move to the lower right-hand corner, get the little black plus sign, and drag it across, which is going to fill the value all the way across from January through December without having to type it over again. The last thing we're going to do using our grouped worksheets is pretty much the same thing, except this time we're going to create a calculation. If we move over to cell O4, this is going to be the total annual cost. We need to create a sum function that adds up all of the values from column C all the way through to column N. We'll create the simple sum function, and then I'm going to click and drag, but we could also type the cell references as well. There's the start of the function, along with the opening parenthesis, and now I'm simply going to click and drag across the cells I want to use. As I said, it certainly is okay if you prefer to type these values as well. Once it's finished, all we have to do is press Enter. We'll use that fill handle one more time, which is on the lower right-hand corner of the cell. With the little black plus sign, we don't have to drag though because we want to fill down this entire column. And here's a little trick for you. Let me move this cell selection out of the way. When you have the plus sign and you want to fill a column, by simply double-clicking, it will automatically fill those values all the way to the end of the data. Now this is fairly short data, but especially when things don't fit on one screen, that can save you a lot of scrolling. Now, we finished our work with the grouped worksheets, so I strongly recommend that we go back down to the bottom, right-click on any one of those grouped sheets, and choose Ungroup Sheets. This way, we make sure that we don't inadvertently make changes to all of the worksheets from this point forward. Notice that when we move to the Boston worksheet, that we now see NA for our sewer utilities, and also for the lawn, and for maintenance on the months that don't have any maintenance fees. We can see similar types of things for Seattle that doesn't pay for water. In this video, we worked with individual worksheets as a group in order to ensure that we are consistent and optimize our efforts. We also created a custom format and used the fill handle to quickly apply both values and to copy calculations.